Ezra Blackwood had it all: a successful career, a loving partner, and a luxurious penthouse in Seattle. But after a freak accident left him clinically dead for 7 minutes, what he experienced changed everything he thought he knew about life, love, and eternity. I never thought much about death until it happened to me. At 47, I was living what I considered my best life in my high-rise apartment overlooking the Seattle skyline. As a senior architect at one of the city's top firms, I had everything I wanted: respect, money, and Marcus, my partner of 8 years. That morning started like any other. I was getting ready for an important client meeting, adjusting my Armani tie in the mirror while Marcus made his signature espresso in the kitchen. The smell of coffee and his humming of some pop song filled our modern, minimalist space. Everything felt normal, safe, predictable. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Hendersons tonight," Marcus called out from the kitchen. I nodded absently, more focused on the presentation I had to give in 2 hours. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was uneventful. I was checking emails on my phone, not really paying attention to my surroundings. That's when it happened. As I approached my Tesla, I noticed something odd: a puddle of clear liquid under the car next to mine. Before I could process what it might be, I slipped. The fall itself wasn't what killed me. It was the way my head hit the concrete pillar on the way down. The doctors later told me that the impact caused severe internal bleeding in my brain. But in that moment, all I knew was sudden, blinding pain, then nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. I remember lying there, unable to move, watching the fluorescent lights above me flicker. Someone was shouting, probably the security guard who found me. My phone had skidded across the floor, still displaying the email I'd been reading. Such a mundane detail to remember when you're dying. The pain began to fade, replaced by an odd sensation of floating. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. Marcus would be wondering why I wasn't answering his texts. We were supposed to meet for lunch at our favorite sushi place. Funny how your mind wanders to such ordinary things when you're at death's door. I thought about my life as I lay there. The childhood in Portland, where I first realized I was different from other boys. The years of hiding, then finally coming out in college. Meeting Marcus at that charity gala, both of us reaching for the last stuffed mushroom. Our first apartment together, the fights, the makeups, the lazy Sunday mornings. The paramedics arrived, their voices urgent but professional. I could feel them working on me, but it was like watching a movie of someone else's life. Everything was becoming distant, less real. The last thing I remember before everything changed was one of them saying, "We're losing him." Then darkness. Complete and absolute darkness. But that darkness was just the beginning. What came next would shake the very foundations of everything I believed about life, death, and love. It would force me to question not just who I was, but who I was meant to be. The darkness didn't last long. It felt like being pulled through a tunnel at impossible speed, but without any sensation of movement. Colors began to appear, not colors I'd ever seen before, colors that don't exist in our world. They swirled and danced around me, creating patterns that seemed to hold meaning just beyond my understanding. Then came the light. Not the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage, but a light that was alive, conscious, loving. It radiated not just brightness, but pure love. A love so intense it would have been unbearable if it hadn't also brought with it a profound sense of peace. I found myself standing in what looked like a vast garden, but everything was more real than reality itself. Each blade of grass seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The flowers weren't just colorful, they sang, actually sang, in harmonies that made Mozart sound like a child banging on pots and pans. Ezra. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was like 1,000 voices speaking as one, yet as intimate as a whisper in my ear. I turned and saw him. Jesus stood before me, but not the Jesus from the stained glass windows or religious paintings. This was Jesus as he truly is, power and love personified. His eyes held the weight of eternity, yet they sparkled with joy. His presence was overwhelming, yet I felt completely at ease. "My child," he said, and in those 2 words I understood more about love than I had in all my 47 years on earth. But then something unexpected happened. He showed me my life, not as I remembered it, but as it truly was. Every moment, every choice, every impact I'd had on others. both good and bad. I saw how my actions had rippled out to affect people I'd never even met. I saw myself as a child, innocent and pure. I saw the moment when I first felt attraction to other boys, and I saw something I'd never understood before, how that attraction had been shaped by wounds and fears I'd carried from early childhood. It wasn't who I was meant to be. It was a response to pain I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Your heart has always sought love, Jesus said gently, but you've been looking for it in ways that cannot fulfill your soul's true longing. He showed me Marcus, and I felt his deep love for him too. But I also saw how our relationship, though filled with genuine affection, was built on mutual woundedness rather than true divine love. We were two broken people trying to fill our emptiness with each other instead of with God's love. The scenes continued to unfold before me. I saw moments when I'd chosen lust over love, temporary pleasure over lasting joy. But there was no condemnation in these revelations, only understanding and an invitation to something better. I created you for more, Jesus said. Your identity isn't found in your attractions or relationships, but in being my beloved child. As Jesus spoke these words, the garden around us transformed. We were suddenly standing in what appeared to be a vast library, but instead of books, the shelves held what looked like glowing orbs of light. Each orb, I somehow knew, contained a person's complete life story. These are the lives that could have been, Jesus explained. The paths not taken, the choices unmade. He reached out and touched one of the orbs, and suddenly I was watching an alternative version of my life unfold. I saw myself as I could have been, not struggling with same-sex attraction, but living in the fullness of God's design. I saw joy that went deeper than any pleasure I'd ever known, peace that surpassed any contentment I'd found in my relationships. This isn't about condemning who you are, Jesus said, reading my thoughts. It's about showing you who you were created to be. Then he showed me something that shook me to my core, the spiritual reality behind human sexuality. I saw how intimate union was meant to reflect the divine dance between Christ and his church, how the physical was meant to mirror the spiritual. I understood, for the first time, why gender and sexuality weren't just arbitrary assignments, but deep spiritual truths encoded in creation itself. The scene shifted again, and we were standing on what seemed like the edge of existence itself. Below us stretched an infinite abyss that radiated not darkness, but the absence of all light, all hope, all love. The sight of it made my soul recoil. This is what awaits those who reject my love, Jesus said softly. Not because I send them there, but because they choose it by rejecting the truth written in their hearts. I could feel the heat rising from that terrible void, hear distant screams that made my spirit tremble. This was hell, not a place of cartoon devils with pitchforks, but the terrible reality of existence completely separated from God's love. Many are there now, Jesus continued, not because of their struggles or temptations, but because they embraced lies instead of truth, because they chose to define love on their own terms rather than accepting my definition of it. The vision was overwhelming, but Jesus wasn't finished. He showed me the spiritual warfare raging around human sexuality in our time, how the enemy had twisted and distorted one of God's most beautiful gifts to humanity. I saw how the LGBTQ movement, despite containing many sincere people seeking love and acceptance, was being used as a tool to separate people from God's design and purpose. The enemy knows that if he can confuse humanity about something as fundamental as gender and sexuality, he can keep them from understanding the deeper spiritual truths these things were meant to reveal, Jesus explained. The scene shifted once more, and we were standing in what appeared to be a vast throne room. The glory that emanated from the throne itself was so intense that I couldn't look directly at it. Angels moved through the space, their forms both beautiful and terrifying, nothing like the gentle cherubs depicted in art. Now, Jesus said, I will show you what true love is. Suddenly, I was witnessing the creation of the universe itself. I saw love as a tangible force, the very power that spoke galaxies into existence. I understood that love wasn't just an emotion or a choice. It was the fundamental force of reality, and God was its source. Then Jesus showed me his crucifixion, but not as a distant historical event. I experienced it as if I were there, feeling every moment of his sacrifice. The physical pain was beyond comprehension, But even worse was the spiritual agony of taking on the sins of humanity. I felt his love for humanity, for me, that made him willing to endure this torture. "This is what I did for you," he said, "not so you could continue in patterns that harm you, but so you could be free to become who I created you to be." He then showed me something that left me speechless, the spiritual DNA, if you will, of human beings. I saw how each person was crafted with intricate care, their gender and sexuality woven into the very fabric of their being. The distortions I saw, including my own same-sex attraction, were like mutations in this perfect design, caused by the fall of humanity and perpetuated by generational patterns of brokenness. "Your attraction to men isn't your true identity," Jesus explained. "It's a wound that I want to heal." He showed me how my own same-sex attractions had developed, the emotional wounds from childhood, the father wounds, the peer rejection, the cultural influences. But he also showed me how these could be healed, not through suppression or self-hatred, but through his love and truth. I saw Marcus again, but this time I saw him through Jesus' eyes, a beloved child of God who was also living with wounds and distortions that needed healing. I felt Jesus' deep love for him, and his desire for Marcus to also know the truth and be set free. "Love doesn't mean accepting everything," Jesus said. "True love desires what's best for the beloved, even when that means challenging deeply held beliefs and identities." He then showed me a series of people throughout history who had struggled with same-sex attraction but had found freedom and wholeness in him. Their stories weren't about suppression or denial, but about transformation through love. They had discovered their true identity in Christ, and in doing so, their attractions had gradually changed. The vision continued as Jesus showed me the spiritual reality of marriage, not just as a human institution, but as a divine mystery. I saw how the union of man and woman was designed to reflect the relationship between Christ and his church, a truth so profound it made my previous understanding of relationships seem shallow in comparison. "This is why marriage matters," Jesus explained. "It's not just about human happiness or social convention. It's about displaying a spiritual reality that the enemy wants to distort and destroy." He then showed me the future, not specific events, but the spiritual battles that were coming. I saw how the normalization of various sexual identities and behaviors was part of a larger spiritual strategy to blur the lines between truth and lies, to make people question the very foundations of creation itself. But then he showed me hope. People finding freedom, relationships being restored, lives being transformed. I saw former LGBTQ individuals who had discovered their true identity in Christ, living in joy and peace that surpassed anything their former lifestyle had offered. "My church has often failed in this area," Jesus said. "They've either condemned without love or accepted without truth. I'm calling my people to hold both, to love completely while standing firmly in truth." The scene shifted again, and I found myself watching my own funeral, not as it would be if I died now, but as it would be if I continued on my current path. I saw the spiritual impact of my choices extending far beyond my death, influencing others to remain in bondage rather than seeking freedom in Christ. Then he showed me another possible future, one where I chose to embrace his truth. I saw myself helping others find freedom, sharing my testimony with love and compassion. I saw lives being changed because I had the courage to change first. "This is why I'm showing you these things," Jesus said, "not to condemn you, but to set you free, and through your freedom, others will find their way to me." The vision was overwhelming, but with each revelation I felt layers of confusion and false identity falling away. The truth wasn't just convincing my mind, it was transforming my heart. "Remember," Jesus said, "I'm not asking you to become something you're not. I'm inviting you to become who you truly are, who I created you to be." As these words settled into my spirit, I began to feel a pull back toward my body. The time for my return was approaching, but I knew I wasn't going back the same person who had left. Before I could return, Jesus had one final thing to show me. We moved through what seemed like a corridor of light, and suddenly we were in what I can only describe as the control room of the universe. Here I saw how every prayer, every choice, every moment of human existence was intricately connected. "Watch carefully," Jesus said, "for this is why your choice matters more than you know." He showed me how my lifestyle had affected not just me, but countless others. Like ripples in a pond, my choices had influenced friends, colleagues, and even strangers to either move closer to or further from God's truth. I saw young people who had used my example to justify their own confusion about sexuality, and it broke my heart. But then Jesus showed me something extraordinary, the power of a transformed life. I saw how one person's journey from darkness to light could impact generations. He showed me specific people who would find their way to him through my testimony if I chose to embrace his truth. Your story isn't just about you, Jesus explained. It's about everyone your life will touch. The scene shifted, and I witnessed what appeared to be a massive spiritual battle. Angels and demons were fighting over human souls, but not with swords or spears. They were fighting with truth and lies. I saw how the enemy used confusion about gender and sexuality as one of his primary weapons. The battle for sexual identity is really a battle for the soul, Jesus said. The enemy knows that if he can convince people to reject their created design, he can keep them from understanding my love. Then he showed me the deeper spiritual meaning of gender, how masculinity and femininity reflect different aspects of God's nature, and how the union of male and female in marriage creates a complete picture of divine love that same-sex relationships, despite any genuine feelings involved, simply cannot replicate. I saw my own masculine identity, buried under years of confusion and wrong beliefs, beginning to emerge like a butterfly from a cocoon. This wasn't about conforming to stereotypes. It was about embracing who I was created to be. Your healing won't happen overnight, Jesus said gently, but I will be with you every step of the way. He then showed me specific steps I would need to take, breaking soul ties from past relationships, renewing my mind with truth, finding support from others who had walked this path, and most importantly, staying connected to him through prayer and worship. The enemy will try to convince you that you're denying your true self, Jesus warned. But remember what you've seen here. Remember who you really are. As my time in eternity drew to a close, Jesus gave me one final vision. I saw myself standing before him on Judgment Day, but this time I saw two possible outcomes. In one, I had chosen to hold on to my old identity, and the pain of separation from him was unbearable. In the other, I had embraced his truth and helped others find freedom, and his well done, good and faithful servant brought joy beyond description. The choice is yours, Jesus said. I will never force you, but I will always love you and be here waiting. Then he showed me practical glimpses of my immediate future, the challenges I would face, the support I would need, and the victories that would come. I saw myself having difficult conversations with Marcus, facing rejection from some friends, but also finding unexpected allies and a new community of believers who would walk alongside me. Remember, Jesus said, true love sometimes means choosing the harder path. I felt the pull back to my body growing stronger. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt power surge through my spirit. This power is available to you always, he said. The same power that raised me from the dead lives in those who believe. The scenes of heaven began to fade, but Jesus' final words burned themselves into my soul. You are not defined by your attractions, but by my love for you. Go and tell others what you have seen. As I began to return, I passed through what seemed like layers of reality. Each layer revealed more about the spiritual battle raging over human sexuality in our world. I saw how the enemy had twisted God's design, but I also saw how God's truth was stronger than any deception. The journey back was faster than the journey out. Colors swirled around me, reality bent and shifted, and suddenly I was aware of intense pain, physical pain in my body, lying on the cold concrete of the parking garage. I could hear voices, "He's back! We've got a pulse!" The paramedics were still working on me, their voices urgent but relieved. The fluorescent lights seemed harsh and artificial after the pure light of heaven. But something was different. I was different. In those moments between two worlds, I had been transformed. I tried to speak but couldn't. Yet in my spirit, I was already beginning to pray, thanking Jesus for what he had shown me, and asking for strength for what lay ahead. I knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I would never be the same. Recovery in the hospital took 3 weeks. The doctors called my survival a miracle. but they had no idea just how miraculous it truly was. During those quiet hospital nights, I began processing everything I had seen and experienced. The truth was settling into my soul, changing me from the inside out. Marcus visited every day, bringing flowers and his worried love. Looking at him now, I saw him differently. Not with the romantic love I once felt, but with a deep, compassionate understanding of his own brokenness and need for Jesus. I knew the conversation we needed to have would hurt us both, but I also knew it was necessary. When I finally told him about my experience and my decision to leave our relationship, he reacted exactly as Jesus had shown me he would. First with disbelief, then anger, and finally a quiet, sad acceptance. "I don't understand," he said, "but I can see something's different about you." The hardest part wasn't losing Marcus or even facing the disapproval of our friends in the LGBTQ community. The hardest part was the daily battle in my own mind and heart, choosing to walk in truth even when my feelings hadn't caught up yet. But just as Jesus had promised, he was with me every step of the way. I found a church that balanced truth with love, and a support group for people walking away from the LGBTQ lifestyle. Their stories were different from mine, but we shared the same foundation, an encounter with Jesus that had changed everything. Gradually, I began to notice changes in my attractions. It wasn't immediate or magical, but as I renewed my mind with truth and allowed Jesus to heal the root wounds in my heart, my desires began to align with his design. The process was both beautiful and painful, like watching a broken bone being reset and healed. 6 months after my near-death experience, I shared my testimony publicly for the first time. The response was mixed. Some people walked out in anger, but others stayed behind, tears in their eyes, asking questions about hope and freedom. Today, 2 years later, I'm a different man. I lead a ministry helping others find freedom from sexual brokenness, and I've seen countless lives transformed by the same truth that set me free. My attraction to women has grown naturally as my identity in Christ has strengthened. The LGBT community that once embraced me now largely rejects me, calling me a traitor or claiming I was never really gay. But I know my truth, and more importantly, I know the truth. The love I experience now in Christ is deeper and more fulfilling than anything I knew before. Sometimes I think back to that day in the parking garage, grateful for the accident that led to my eternal awakening. Death showed me how to truly live. If this story has touched your heart, please like and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell to stay updated with more powerful testimonies of God's transforming love. Share this video to spread hope to others who might be struggling with their identity. Remember, with Jesus, freedom is possible.